Hello, everyone. This is Jim Renacci. I want to welcome you to another episode of the Buckeye War Room. I want to thank you for joining. Jim, for those of you who don't remember me, I was a four-time congressman in Ohio's 16th district, ran for the U.S. Senate in 2018 against Sherrod Brown, and then also ran against Mike DeWine in the 2022 primary. So we're talking Ohio. This is about Ohio politics, Ohio, what's going on in Ohio. And I'm happy to have Scott Sands, who is our Northwest. We're gonna call him our Northwest guy. We're gonna talk about Northwest Ohio, but we're also going to talk about things related to Ohio in general. So I want to welcome Scott. Scott is the radio host and political analyst for WSPD in Toledo. Prior to coming to Ohio, Scott was on the air in the Gulf Coast to the West Coast. He also served as communications director and senior policy advisor for Republican U.S. congressional campaign in Indiana. I want to welcome our friend Scott Sands to our podcast. Thank you, Scott, for joining.
Hey, Jim, it's good to be in the war room. It's weird to be on this side of the microphone, though. Usually I'm the one asking you the questions. Well,
that's true. But what we're trying to do is equalize this and get back at you a little. But only kidding. It's great to have you. And we're going to talk, like I say, about Ohio, Northwest Ohio. But let's talk about a couple things first related to Ohio. And I know you've been talking about them on your show. Recently, a federal judge took apart some parts of the ban on overseas dollars in Ohio elections. It's an interesting issue. You would think that this is something pretty simple. We should be banning overseas dollars in Ohio elections. But of course, we have a judge who has took apart some of those issues. Let's talk about some of those. What are your thoughts? What are you hearing? What do you think?
Well, I think the sponsor of the bill originally, Bill Seitz, was absolutely correct in taking out the green card requirement. The green card ban from that bill would have eliminated the argument that the judge had in overturning and staying this bill, because I think the judge has a valid point, and Bill Seitz had a valid point as well. If we're going to trust a green card holder, a lawful permanent resident of this country, to serve in the military, we might as well let them participate in the political process as well as part of their First Amendment rights. To take it one step further, though, I do believe that foreign money has no business in the American political scene, but we're seeing that influence already, and there are unfortunately many back doors to getting that money into campaign coffers.
Well, you're exactly right, and let's face it, we do have a lot of overseas and out-of-state money coming into Ohio, affecting our political campaigns. This would have slowed down some of that overseas money. I oftentimes think we should eliminate some of the out-of-state money as well.
Right. Well, we've talked about that before. Last year with issue 1 and issue 2, there was a lot of out-of-state money that came in on both sides of both of those issues.
Yeah, well, let's run right to issue 1, because that's an issue that I have said is going to change the face of Ohio for a long, long time. What's interesting about issue 1 is the proponents have said, this is citizens over politicians, citizens over politics. They've branded it to make it seem like it's a simple issue. It's citizens' rights and it's citizens making decisions. Yeah. We know that's not true.
The branding of it and the argument has been perfectly framed, because in theory, and when you hear what gerrymandering is, it sounds wrong. It sounds bad. On the plus side, to the victors go the spoil. If you don't want gerrymandering against your political party, win more elections. That's what Democrats have been telling Republicans for a long time. Win more elections. However, if you really break it down, the districting process provides for more equitable representation and diversity, because we are able to group certain geographic and sociographic regions. And that's not always a bad thing.
Well, it's interesting. I saw a commercial that's going to run. It's actually Ronald Reagan stating that, and this is going to be used to support issue 1, He's basically saying that gerrymandering should not be done and that should be put in the hands of the people, not the politicians. We should keep cities and states together, or cities and counties and farmland together and industrial area together. So that's going to be used as a commercial supporting this issue.
And generally speaking, it makes good sense. I'm actually wearing a Reagan Bush T-shirt under this shirt now to go see the Reagan movie later tonight.
Oh, it's funny. I'm going to see the Reagan movie later this week as well. So interesting. But you're right. Many of us are big time supporters of Ronald Reagan. How are we going to get around this? He came out. Yeah. Now, again, he was stating it in a much different manner, but it doesn't matter. It'll be used. People will say, look, even Reagan supported citizens over politicians.
So, Jim, what's the solution? You've served in Congress. You've been part of the political process. I mean, who do you trust to draw state district maps? Do you give it to a bunch of kindergartners and say, hey, we need 65, we need 102, we need divide up the state as you best see fit? Who's going to do that? And there is no way to avoid political bias at any point during the process unless you make it just as basic as, okay, if you're in one county is one district. You get one state senator, you get one state representative. That's about as basic as you could make the process. But even that's not fair. In Northwest Ohio, we've got parts of Toledo and parts of the suburban area that represents Toledo that bleed into Wood County. You've got Wood County that people that come to work in the city of Toledo, and people that work that live in Toledo that may go to work in Wood County. So there's no way to fairly do it that way either.
Well, one of the things, I've sat on a panel in regard to this, and I've said we need a computer program that does it, that takes the politicians out of it. Now, I still think the politicians who we vote for need to be a part of it. Look at what we have today. I mean, we have the 3 statewides, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans who vote on this. So that's not a bad situation. The problem is it's being rewritten because many on the left did not like the way these were drafted. Well, the answer is vote them out. If you don't like the people that are making the decisions, vote them out. The problem we have today, which I am hoping that the people realize, is that we are setting up another bureaucratic system that's going to be established by retired judges, and we're not going to have the rights when we don't like this situation. I mean, we may not like there may be people today that say, well, I don't like the gerrymandering. Well, if you don't like it under the new system that's being proposed, you're really in trouble, because you cannot, you can't vote these people out. They're going to be bureaucrats with terms, and they're going to be paid by taxpayer dollars. This is not a good situation. So, your question for me, as I've said all along, make sure that we have the ability to fire the people and vote the people out that are doing what we don't like.
Yeah, the solution is never to add an extra layer of unelected bureaucracy to the process. And this was never a problem. This was never controversial in Ohio. And I've only lived here for about 10 years, but it was never a problem when Ohio was a swing state, when it was a purple state. But now that it's become a reliably red state, and Republicans control the state legislature, all of a sudden now it's a problem. Why isn't this a problem in Democrat-controlled Illinois, where gerrymandering is an even worse issue? It's only become a problem in Ohio because Republicans have begun to exert dominance in the political process. And even with that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this here shortly, this is still a state where Sherrod Brown can be elected senator, where Marcy Kaptur can be a congresswoman for 42 years, even though there are Republicans who are in every other state elected state office. So Democrats do have opportunities in the state.
Well, I think the argument is, and we're going to go to some of those races, but you're right. We are not what the argument is, we're not a 60-40 Republican state, even though we do have a House and Senate that pretty much represents a supermajority. So I think that's what the argument is. But I got to tell you, if this issue 1 passes, we're not going to be a 60-40. We're going to be a 55-45 or a 52-48. And that's why I say it will change the face of our state and politics for a long, long time.
And just to play devil's advocate here, Jim, I mean, what's the downside of that and forcing some compromise, forcing some political fences to be mended, to have some checks and balances on the entire process? I mean, obviously, I'm not going to agree with the majority of the Democrats who might be elected to the state legislature, but super majorities also present their own problems, as we've seen in some of the energy deals that have been done in the state, as an example.
Well, I agree with you. And by the way, Scott, when the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate, they controlled the gerrymandering and they fixed it all toward themselves too. So this issue really comes down to we have elections, you vote, and I'm hoping people understand that this issue one is about putting it all in the hands of the bureaucracy and the bureaucrats. It's not a good solution. Hopefully we can get it defeated, and I hope that's what people are talking about up in Northwest Ohio.
Yeah, I think so, and I think Republicans understand the consequences of the election, and I'm hoping that in a presidential election year, we'll see that vote on issue 1 go the same way that perhaps the presidential election will go.
Well, it's going to be interesting. Let's change gears. Kamala Harris and the media. You've been in the media for 20 plus years. She seems to be getting a pass, and absolutely seems to be getting not only a pass, but everything seems to be Kamala. Kamala's great. Kamala this, Kamala that. What are your thoughts? It's where are we going with this? And it's one of the reasons why she seems to be getting some wind in her sails, not only around the country, but also in Ohio. I don't know if you're aware, but the polls, we see a lot of polls with former President Trump up 8 or 9, but I've seen a couple polls with former President Trump only up 2, 3, and 4.
The media has obviously been very favorable to the Harris campaign. I just saw a statistic right before coming on with you, Jim, that said the DNC received media coverage that was 88% positive, as opposed to the Republican convention, which was 93% negative. I think it may have been the EMRC that did that study. And I'm not a conspiracy guy, Jim. You've been on my show enough to know that I don't believe that the media is trying to stack the deck, but the individual reporters and journalists and people covering the election certainly have no love lost for Donald Trump. And I think we began to see that when media coverage actually began to point out some of the mental flaws in Joe Biden, especially after his debate with Donald Trump. And now that there is this so-called new energy and enthusiasm for Kamala Harris, I think they want to see the opportunity taken to maximize that, to bring down Donald Trump once again and get him out of their hair. Whether that's successful or not, we'll see in November. What's
interesting is what you just said there is that the media also apparently wanted Joe Biden out, and they took advantage of the situation and they led us down that path that Biden had to get out as well. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
I don't think they wanted him out till they saw how poorly he did in the debate against Donald Trump. I think they were fully ready to protect and defend Joe Biden until they saw just how bad it really was.
It's interesting, and you're right, and they pretty much have driven the Kamala Harris positions, but they're not even interviewing her, which is pretty. Of course,
about her favorite album, what album she just bought. It's the Kamala Harris version of Joe Biden's favorite ice cream story. And meanwhile, they'll attack Donald Trump for supporting Gold Star families at Arlington National Cemetery. And even, this was an interesting story. I don't know if you saw on Twitter earlier today. John McCain's son condemning Donald Trump for being photographed at Arlington. He had his own dad, John McCain himself, put together a campaign ad at Arlington. So the hypocrisy across the board there is quite palpable.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And let's face it, this is a media that does not like former President Trump. And I will also say, if I was the campaign manager for Kamala Harris, I'd be telling her to do the exact thing that she's doing.
Yeah.
Don't talk, don't interview, stay out of the public, do your rallies. It's the right thing for her to do in the situation that she's in.
Yeah. Even today, her campaign staff refusing to answer questions about her current stance on reparations. So that even her staff, which had been leaking these flip-flops on certain policies, including electric vehicle mandates and the like, decided, you know what? We don't have to put policies up on the website. We don't have to talk about any issues. We can just run on, instead of hope, as Barack Obama did, we can run on joy. And so far that seems to be a strategy that's working for him.
No, you're exactly right. Well, let's talk about some Ohio races. You have the pulse on Northwest Ohio in that region. What are your thoughts on the Marin race? Where do you think that's at? I mean, I can tell you what I hear, but you're on the ground, you're there. What are your thoughts?
I think the people, there are a lot of people in Northwest Ohio that recognize Marcy Kaptur has been in office too long, now at 42 years. And as we've talked about, only passed 5 pieces of legislation. 2 of those, I think, were post office names. In her 42 years, has never chaired a committee during her tenure in Washington. And I think that there are a lot of people who recognize that it's time for a change. However, Marcy Kaptur, with that 42-year incumbency, certainly has better name recognition. She's got more money behind her. That said, I think the tide has begun to turn for Derek Marin, who is facing, I think, a challenge of name recognition in parts of District 9. However, he's also proven that he can beat Democrats. His local district in the state legislature is a Democrat district, and he won there by +4. And much of District 9, much of Ohio 9, encompasses his home district. Hopefully, that's a good sign going into this.
Well, I know his district is an R+3, I believe, which gives you a little bit of comfort that he should be able to win.
Thanks to the gerrymandering that we were talking about a little while ago. One of the spoils that might go to the victors if successful, but it's not going to be a cakewalk. Even if this district is now showing as R+3, it's still, I mean, it's frankly going to be hard to beat Marcy Kaptur in this district where she's been so long, and so many people like her, even though they can't name one accomplishment she's had for this area.
Incumbency is a tough thing to beat. I used to say when I ran against Governor DeWine, people say, you're running against an incumbent. I said, yeah. I said, but I'm running as a principal that, I just didn't believe he was doing what's right for the state. But still, incumbents win 94% of the time. And I used to tell people that. I said, this is never easy. It's never easy. So it's not going to be easy for Derek to defeat an incumbent, especially a 42-year incumbent, because you hit the nail on the head. She's got her roots into the community, and there are probably some Republicans that like her just as well as Democrats.
And I mean, she's got, I think, a 5-1 margin in finances to Derek Marin. It's going to be hard to overcome, but I pulled out a list of endorsements that Derek had received recently from the Toledo Police Patrolmen's Association, the Command Officers Association, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Club for Growth, NFIB. I mean, he's getting, especially with the law enforcement leaders in District 9, he's getting some endorsements that Marcy Kaptur had previously won.
Wow. Well, that's good. That's good to hear. I mean, he does have an uphill battle, but as we said, the gerrymandering of that district gives him a little edge. Her incumbency gives her an edge. It'll be interesting to see where we end up.
I'm optimistic about Derek Marin and also Kevin Coughlin in his race, which I'm not following as closely, obviously, but it would be a huge victory in D.C. to flip these 2 seats to the Republican column.
Well, I can tell you the 501c4 Jefferson Rising that I'm a part of, the polling shows that there are 20 races in the country, congressional races, that have a chance of flipping. And both of those races you talked about are in the battle. The sad thing is, you have those that are higher up and lower up in the 20. They're in the battle, they're in the fight, and hopefully they can pull both of these off. But and again, the other race you talked about, Sykes is the incumbent, which makes it a little tougher as well.
Yeah. I think both of those races, as you talk about that top 20 target list, are kind of in the middle. We've got about 30 days before early voting begins in Ohio. And I think both candidates need to be able to increase their name recognition as much as possible. I know the Derek Merrin campaign has an increased spend. They're up on radio, TV, billboards now in District 9. Hopefully that'll help with some of the name recognition factor. And it's that time of the year where people are starting to pay a little bit more attention to the race as well. I don't think we'll get Marcy Kaptur to a debate, but they can certainly ask.
Yeah, well, again, we'll have to keep an eye on those and see what happens. Anything can happen in any races, as you know. I tell everybody, political races and changes occur in the last 30 to 45 days, and we're starting to get into that. Let's change gears and talk about the Senate race. It's another look. In the beginning, there are 8 Senate races that I can tell you that the NRSC is looking at. Ohio is in those, is one of the states, one of the 8 seats. We also just learned that the NRSC has decided to pull out their dollars that they're going to spend in Ohio. They did that to me, of course, 6 years ago as well, because Ohio is a very expensive state. But what are you hearing about Bernie Moreno and, of course, Sherrod Brown?
I think Bernie's facing some of the same challenges that Derek Merrin is here in District 9, is a name recognition issue against an incumbent who's got a lot of money. I'm optimistic about the race. I think the more votes that we can get out to the polls for Donald Trump in Ohio, the better Bernie Moreno will do. But you've run a campaign against Sherrod Brown too. You know that he can come across as likable, as a blue collar, working for you kind of guy, populist, even though he votes 99% of the time with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and other liberals in the Senate. He's certainly a liberal, but he's a likable guy, and that's a tough battle to fight for somebody who people in the state don't know yet.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. The biggest issue here is you've got a statewide incumbent who's been around for 50 plus years. Everybody knows him. He is a likable guy to Republicans. That's what I heard when I ran against him. And most people don't know who Bernie Moreno is. The other thing is, believe it or not, even though Sherrod is one of the most liberal members of Congress, he campaigns to the middle. He does campaign to the middle. You've probably seen that up in Northwest Ohio.
It's smart, and Sherrod has been able to gain the endorsement of Republican sheriffs like Mark Vasilishin and Wood County for, oddly enough, his work to secure the border and protect us from the influx of fentanyl. And Sheriff Vasilishin's words, even though we got thousands of Ohioans who are dying from fentanyl and opioid overdoses as a direct result of Democrat policies on the border. So it was kind of, and I like the sheriff, but it was kind of an odd endorsement to come in this particular race.
It's interesting you brought that up. I noticed that endorsement, and I wonder the exact same thing. How did that occur? Is there a personal relationship? What were some of the reasons? And so you're telling me it was the fentanyl border work then, right?
Yeah, I forget the entire story, but I talked to the sheriff about this on my radio show. Sherrod Brown invited Sheriff Vasilishin up to the State of the Union address. I forget what the catalyst was for that invitation to occur, but apparently during their meetings, during that time in D.C., they found some common ground on that issue, which, again, is surprising as horrible as Sherrod Brown has been on border security.
Well, it's funny. I was in Washington, and I got to tell you, I won over a lot of hearts and souls of people that I invited to the State of the Union address. So
there's a charm about that, I guess.
Must be the answer. That's interesting, because you're exactly right. I had people who were anti-Renacci who became pro-Renacci after the State of the Union. So that's an interesting piece. But yeah, I would agree with you. Look, there was a poll just came out yesterday. Bernie's down 5. I saw a poll, I don't know, 2 days ago. Bernie's down 7. He has to get name ID, and believe it or not, I was at a dinner in Cleveland, sitting across the table with 3 or 4 business people. They said to me, "What do you think about Sherrod Brown?" And I said, "Well, he doesn't represent Ohio very well." And then somebody said, "Well, who's running against him?" Now, these are 3 business people in Cleveland. I was really shocked that they did not know that Bernie Moreno was running against Sherrod Brown.
I do know that Sherrod Brown's spending a lot of money. His poll numbers are going down, even though he's spending that money. The loss of NRSC money will certainly hurt the Moreno campaign. But you tell me, Jim, you've run against Sherrod. Do you go negative against him? It's hard to run negative ads against a likable guy. When we start to see news stories about Sherrod Brown voting in favor of adding 87,000 new IRS agents, but he's been a guy who's failed to pay his taxes on time. That story coming out today. Those are stories that might dent that reputation a little bit, but it's hard to go negative against a guy that people like.
Yeah, and here's what's interesting. I ran those same things. They don't work. You really do have to have the money to show how you are different than Sherrod Brown, because that's really what it's going to come down to. Sherrod's been around too long. You could run all the negative. You could say he didn't pay his real estate taxes. Yeah, I did that. I ran that ad. You could say that in the end, people know who Sherrod Brown is. He's been around a long time. You have to show who you are. And I do think the one thing, if I was coaching Bernie Moreno at this stage of the game, I would tell him he needs Sherrod has done a great job of getting his positives out. And Bernie has sat back and waited. Now Bernie's going to come out and try and hit him a little bit. It's tough in the last 60 days, especially when you're hitting him with things that he's been hit with in the past. I can tell you that I tried to hit him at the end because I was about in the same position about this time 6 years ago. You just have to have enough money to get your name out and who you are and why you're a better candidate. And there are some people that have said this. I may agree. Bernie may have come out too late. We'll see.
So I think you're right that Sherrod Brown's been inoculated against a lot of the attacks. How important, both on the state level and for District 9, for Derek Marin and for Kevin Coughlin and his district, are retail politics this close to the election? It's the time when people really care. State fairs, county fairs are ending. You get out, you shake hands. How important are the door knockers right now that are targeting, I think, 1 million doors in this area?
Yeah, I got to tell you, everything counts, but in the end, it's building that name ID, and it's actually putting your message out. I mean, Sherrod's done a good job of putting his out. Derek's going to have to do a good job of putting his out. They're fighting long-term politics and long-term politicians. It's interesting. I can tell you, after the race, we did our recap, and independents, only 40% of independents knew who Jim Renacci was. So that tells you. Now, I did not spend as much because I didn't have as much as Bernie, and I didn't have the backup that Bernie has. He's got a lot of outside groups. Bernie needs that name ID built up, and then he needs that message built up.
I agree.
Finally, presidential election with so many swing states in play. Do we know who our next president's going to be? What are your thoughts? I mean, we still got a few months to go, but what are you thinking?
It's going to be tight. And, the one thing I would urge and caution is ignore all of the stories about national polls. The popular vote would be great to win. And I think that's the ego contest, but it's not what decides who's going to be in the White House. It's the electoral math. And right now it's boiling down to 7 swing states and about, unfortunately, literally 20 swing counties in those 7 states. that we're looking at. And the electoral margin is anywhere from 270 to 269 to 273 to 267. I mean, it's super close depending on what state you put into what column. And the polls that I'm seeing coming out of those swing states right now is as tight as they've ever been. I don't think that Harris got the huge bump coming out of the DNC that perhaps many experts expected her to see. She was up, obviously, but those numbers are starting to come back down as Donald Trump's numbers are slowly going back up, even in important states like Pennsylvania. I think that I think it will not be an election we know for sure election night, unfortunately. I think Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada will be the states that wind up swinging the election one way or another. But the margin of error in some of these polls that I saw this morning are a 4.9%, 5.1% margin of error, which you can't rely upon. The sample size is just too small at that point. 400 people in a poll of a state is not going to give you reliable indicators. And the truth is, we saw in 2016, 2020, Donald Trump does better on election day than his polling numbers have ever shown. So that's a plus, something to be encouraged by. But everybody needs to vote. You vote however you want, but early voting is available in Ohio, and I would encourage people to take advantage of that. You never know what may come up on election day. We need to embrace the voting opportunities that we're given.
100% agree with you. And let's face it, I do believe former President Trump's going to win Ohio. I agree with you. The state, I just heard this morning too, the state that's going to make the entire difference in the race is Pennsylvania. If Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, she has the best chance of winning. But if Trump wins Pennsylvania, it's over for Kamala Harris. So I think that's why you're seeing the Trump campaign spend so much time in Pennsylvania, and Kamala and the Harris-Walz campaign spending a lot of time in Pennsylvania. It's hard to believe. It used to be Ohio, but now it's Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania will decide the election. Many people are saying that.
Yeah, I don't think either candidate can win without Pennsylvania. I think the path is slightly easier if Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania for her campaign. But Pennsylvania is certainly the key. Donald Trump can lose Michigan. He can lose Nevada if he takes Pennsylvania. But if he loses Pennsylvania, it's a much tougher battle. He'll have to win one of the other blue wall states like Michigan or like Wisconsin.
Well, again, Scott, I want to thank you for being on our podcast. It's always good to talk to you, and it's good to talk to you about Northwest Ohio. But it's also your background experience and your history is so helpful when it comes to politics and judging some of these issues. So thanks again. Appreciate having you on. Maybe we'll have you on again after November. But thanks for your insight and all that you do, especially up in Northwest Ohio.
Anytime. I look forward to our next conversation on my show, Jim.
Thank you so much. And look, this was another episode of the Buckeye War Room. I want to thank you all for listening in as we talk about politics, Ohio, national politics, as we move forward toward November 2024. Thank you again.